All right, Saagar, what are you looking at?
Well, I broke one of my cardinal rules on Thursday in a pit of frustration. Never tweet. I'm exaggerating, of course, but I honestly just could not contain myself. We had just done Breaking Points. My Twitter feed was endless with journalists talking about January 6th committee hearings as if it was the most important thing since Watergate, as if it would be a country-changing experience. I genuinely felt like I was taking crazy pills. So I returned to my old ways and I punched this out. Quote, "Gas is $5 a gallon, people. Genuinely can't imagine giving a shit about these January 6 hearings." Like any great viral tweet, it both took off and it elicited some very strong reactions. The negative reactions, overwhelmingly by liberals and allies of the mainstream media, are actually very revealing. And what do they tell us about what liberals mean when they say democracy? So I thought that we could get into it here. First and foremost was this pushback. What, Saagar? People can't multitask? That is a fair question. But have you paid attention to the US government recently? The government actually cannot multitask, and the media especially can't either. In fact, remember our maxim here. The most pernicious form of media bias is not what they choose to show you, but what they choose not to show you. Every second of airtime, resource, money, time, explanation spent on January 6th by both the Democratic Party, the media, and by Congress is by definition something that could be spent somewhere else. So the current strategy of trying to make this into a big national event is therefore a conscious choice. That was the most practical feedback I received, or what I thought the most reasonable was. But let's move on to the part that I really want to focus on, captured in this tweet by Ayman Moyaldeen. He works over at MSNBC. He responded, quote, "This is nothing to be proud of as a country. It is an indictment of our priorities if the price of a gallon of gas is more important than the attempted overthrow of our democracy." Okay, let's put the overwrought language aside. That is an incredibly revealing tweet, because what Ayman is saying is that people like me, and perhaps like you, who actually do care more about the price of gas being at sky-high levels, somehow have our priorities wrong, more so than a riot that occurred at the Capitol over 16 months ago. And what I love most about that is it actually reveals the core mindset of what the overwhelming pushback to me was. What? Saagar thinks the price of gas is more important than democracy. And my response is that if you're trying to make people care about our capital D democracy more than focusing on the problems that they're actually having in their lives and begging politicians to fix, then you, not me, are the person who is against actual democracy. When I say capital D democracy, I mean it in terms of how it's being used by the press. Protecting the higher-minded institution. It's what the Washington Post loves to put at the top of its paper. Democracy dies in the darkness. It's what Democrats and Biden are always talking about. But what they like to ignore is little d democracy. Democracy as in the people's government, where they make their voices heard through their votes, and they attempt, being the key word, to get their representatives to act on their behalf. Overwhelmingly, we see today in the obsession with January 6th that by focusing on that, instead of gas prices and high inflation, the issues that voters continue to tell pollsters and cry out as their #1 priority that the US government solve. What the obsession with January 6th shows me is that Democrats are unserious about acting democratically. Let's take Pennsylvania GOP gubernatorial candidate Doug Mastriano. Mastriano is actually crazy. He believes in Stop the Steal. He pushed a plan to appoint fake electors in 2020 to try and swing the election. If he's elected governor of Pennsylvania, he gets to appoint the Secretary of State, potentially try and change the election results. I agree with the libs that that is an actual attack on democracy. And yet, they don't seem content on trying to persuade people not to vote for him for any reason beyond that. You know why? Because while, yeah, I think most voters can agree, that sounds pretty crazy. If Doug Mastriano is also out there talking about inflation and gas and rent and cost of living and chaos in people's lives, and the other side is just screaming about what might happen in an election a few years from now, voters might just take a chance on the guy because one is real and the other is hypothetical. We saw this repeatedly in the 2016 campaign. Hillary's "Our children are watching" ads. Trump was vulgar, while Trump was out there making a real case. Look, it's turned out to be a fake one, but at least it was for rooting out corruption in Washington, restoring America's trade fairness scheme, restoring American jobs, and voters said, yeah, you know, I don't particularly care about the tweets. I care about the plan. That's what democracy actually looks like. But to most liberals, the idea of actually trying to win through democratic or at least constitutional means today appears to be a fantasy. If you think Trump and the GOP and Doug Mastriano are such threats to democracy, then beat them through democratic means. Mastriano is the best example. There's no cope for people about the Electoral College in a statewide popular vote election. You either convince voters or you don't, and it's a swing state. The same is the case with many of these Jan 6 crazies that are GOP nominees across the country. If they win, that is on you for being so pathetic that you cannot convince voters otherwise. People in Washington and in the media are obsessed with the word democracy, but the reaction to my tweet really showed me this is all fake. They are obsessed with high-minded discussions of democracy because they have no actual small d democratic plan or case to make to the American people to solve the most pressing issues before them. The discussions of democracy are really just a catfish to hide the fact that Biden and the Democrats have been in office at this point for 18 months and to date have done basically nothing about the problems that most people have in their lives. Thus, they will be punished. That's democracy. So I'll end as I began with the same sentiment. When the people in power are not doing anything about the most pressing problems in your life, then who gives a shit about an event that 16 months ago, where the facts of what happened were pretty clear as day within just a few weeks of the incident? If you actually believe about American democracy, then convince people to vote for you. And if you're too big of a loser to beat Trump or a guy like Mastriano, then sadly, that is a pathetic commentary on you and really not on anybody else. So I just really think it was worth going into.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.